have offered mixed assessments of their learning experiences during the pandemic year. Many of them have complained about the lack of interaction with peers and professors in virtual environments, but appreciated the flexibility they gained in when and how they learned. Overall, they credited their institutions with doing a pretty good job, but it's fair to say they probably graded on a curve. With many colleges planning a significant, if not full, return to their physical campuses this fall, what will students be expecting from their institutions and their professors when it comes to learning? Have the last 15 months reinforced their appreciation for learning in person, or will they expect to have the option to attend class remotely when it suits them? Will professors who changed their teaching practices when they were forced to teach virtually embrace some of the new approaches or tools they adopted during the pandemic, or will they revert to their old ways of doing things? And will colleges recognize that the additional training and support they gave professors really worked and keep providing it, or will they pull back because the crisis has seemed to pass? I'm Doug Letterman, editor and co-founder of Inside Higher Ed, and these are some of the questions we'll explore in this week's episode of The Key. We're joined by three experts on student learning and online education. Justin Lauder is Associate Vice Provost for E-Learning and Academic Partnerships at Texas Tech University. Michelle Miller is Professor of Psychological Sciences and President's Distinguished Teaching Fellow at Northern Arizona University. And Alexandra Salas is Dean for Innovation, Teaching, Digital Learning Excellence, and Educational Support Services at Delaware County Community College in Pennsylvania. Before we begin, here's a brief word from Blackboard, the sponsor of this week's episode of The Key.
This episode is sponsored by Blackboard. Each learner at your institution is following their own unique path. Your EdTech partner should make it easier for your institution to thrive and for learners to succeed. From enrollment to progression, retention, and graduation, only Blackboard offers an ecosystem approach that supports learners across their journey, inside and outside the classroom. Learn more at blackboard.com.
Now on to today's conversation. Michelle, Alex, and Justin, welcome to The Key, and thanks for being here. The main reason we're talking today is to try to understand what students are likely to expect out of their learning experiences this fall, but it'd probably be useful to first get a sense of where we've been. From your various perspectives, what are the most important things that the last year plus revealed to you about the state of post-secondary teaching and learning, wherever and however it occurred? Michelle?
Right. Well, out of all of the things that were expected and unexpected that came through, to me, one big one is that I was, in awe of how quickly and how fluently faculty picked up the kind of just the physical technology itself, including people who had been pretty low-tech devotees up to that point and say, oh, I'd rather hand out paper rather than being in a learning management system, rather have show of hands instead of using a quizzing system. They jumped in and they did what they needed. And I think this really reinforces what so many experts in educational technology have said for years. And just ask any skilled instructional designer and they'll say, it's not about choosing the right app or widget or buying the right thing always. It's about the pedagogy. And I think that it also, the flip side of that is it really showed that people needed these pedagogical strategies. They needed a frame and a conceptual frame and something that was very purpose-driven. And I think that that's where you saw some faculty be more successful in something like a brand new hybrid teaching environment or a fully online environment if they hadn't done it before. That was oftentimes, in my mind, the difference is the people who had that conceptual, okay, here's what I want to accomplish, and I'm really going to get feedback from students as I go along and say, are we getting towards those goals that I laid out? And those who were less engaged. I think that that latter group was the group that oftentimes struggled.
And obviously the goal as the year went on and into this past spring was making sure, trying to bring the people who were lagging up to speed. And I think maybe we can come back to the question of how successfully you and your colleagues and the sort of professoriate and the people who work with the instructors were able to move the needle as the year went on. Justin, you want to jump in next?
Sure. I agree that, we saw faculty kind of jump in, and they knew they had to get education, or the job of providing an education done however they had to. But I also was struck by the resilience of our students, that they kind of went with the faculty, and they knew that they were kind of learning as they went in the spring, many of them, and they were receptive to new ideas and new ways of instruction. I'm reminded of a meme that I saw at the beginning of the pandemic, and it talked about a student saying, you're telling me that my faculty member who can't turn off YouTube autoplay is going to now teach me on Zoom. And that's how we started. But by the end of it, or as faculty got more and more comfortable, students were open to ideas. They found new ways to build that community in their classes. When they were missing out on face-to-face instruction or that community in the classroom, they found ways to do it, either through group chats or GroupMe or things like that. So I think another thing that I saw is just that resilient nature of our students, that this was difficult for faculty who had never taught online, but it was also difficult for the students who never had gone to school online before, because many students, they may take a hybrid class or one or two online, but they don't take their full loads via distance. And so I think their resilience was another thing that really struck me. And I think that's part of the reason it was successful, is that students did go with, this changing time and kind of worked with faculty as they worked online.
Alex?
Sure. I have to echo what Michelle and Justin have said. And I think one of the evidence that I saw, it was the connection between faculty and students, and the agility that they all exhibited, during this time, and how we all learned, faculty, staff, and administration, how to see more possibilities. How the last year cultivated that need, the necessity, the need to be creative and agile for our students in terms of different ways to use a learning management system, different tools for communication. So we just didn't look at a widget for widget's sake. It's like, how purposeful can we be with this, what we have in our toolbox. So it was really impressive.
From spring 2020, when you and your faculty colleagues pivoted on a dime, through to this past spring, we knew that student expectations were probably going to rise and that it was going to be incumbent on institutions and instructors to continually improve to meet the moment. How successful do you think we were? Alex?
There were some faculty who were already using the technology, and I would call them the unsung heroes, right? And the college was well equipped with all the resources needed to be able to pivot at any time. But this necessity put everyone on this path that now tools that were either forgotten or, no one was using before, it just brought folks more actively using the resources that the college provided. And understanding what resources we had, taking inventory, asking questions, taking advantage of, the Center for Teaching and Excellence, our digital learning team. All the resources were always here and present, but now the fact that 100% we had to go online, we felt compelled, and everyone felt compelled to do the best that we could to serve the students.
And do you think it was widely embraced? Do you think, as a general rule, it happened to the extent we needed it to?
I believe that it happened organically, but there was always that hope that things would go back to normal, whatever normal is. And, now we're heading back in that direction. And I see a variety of things. And one is that there are folks who are ready. They were ready 6 months ago to come back. Some had already come back. There were certain courses where were already taught on campus with social distancing precautions in play. But then there are others that still feel uneasy and aren't ready. But it did open the door for opportunity to try different things. And we see other possibilities, high flex, the fact that online is not going to go away, because the students are dictating what they want, and they want a little bit of everything. They want what's convenient. They want a system that's fluid. And I think that's one of the important things that we've learned in this last year about listening to our audience. And our audience are the students, and they have a variety of needs. And this is one way that technology can serve us to be able to serve them.
So we'll come back in a minute to the student expectations piece. I want to focus for just a second more on the faculty side of things. Justin, do you sense that the faculty at Texas Tech and what you saw, what you were able to perceive nationally, did the professoriate collectively embrace this challenge? And do you think that it met the challenge of the moment?
So I think, to be honest, in the spring, probably not, because we were, just trying to figure things out. And one thing my campus did, which a lot of campuses did in the spring of 2020, we allowed students to take the classes credit, no credit. So if they didn't have the best experience or the faculty had issues, they were able to do it that way. So it didn't impact GPAs. But I think as the spring went forward, and then we realized, kind of as Alex said, that, we realized this was going to go a lot longer than we thought originally, then faculty, I think, really started embracing what was there. They went from, okay, let me lecture for 3 hours on Zoom every week to let me do a couple of Zoom, synchronous sessions, but let me really use the tools that are in the LMS to allow for some asynchronous learning. Because, as this moved on further and further, we knew, students were out of work, they were trying to get jobs. And so faculty were having to kind of rethink of some of the ways they were doing the instruction. So I think they, worked with the teaching and learning centers. They worked with instructional designers and Blackboard support to utilize the tools and the things that we have. I've always believed and tell faculty, don't let the tool dictate how you do an instruction. You come up with your instruction and then let us find the tools. And exactly to Alex's point, they were using things that we had. And they were just using them in new or better ways for their classes. And so I think as we went on into the summer and then the fall of 2020, they, faculty that were resistant to online beforehand were becoming some of the experts on campus, and they were becoming the go-to people. And so I think they, as a group, as a collective, did make that move successfully, after that first couple of months of a difficult pivot.
Michelle? Well,
wow. What a complex question to think through. I mean, like Justin, my experience was really that most of that growth and that innovation happened pretty early on in that initial ramp up. And what happened after that was sometimes a matter of fine tuning more than anything else, and people kind of settling on an approach sometimes and going with that. And so wherever you sort of landed at the beginning as far as your approach is where you may have ended up. And although we also, I would echo too, that faculty to faculty support in our case was absolutely critical, with people really jumping into things like a Slack channel and saying, okay, what are you doing to address this? So I think some of the fine tuning, as much as anything, was simplification. It was more a taking away than adding to after that sort of initial pivot. Sometimes it was a function of practice and being able to kind of figure out more on the fly what worked and what didn't. Sometimes the simplification was very student focused, which is a great thing. We say, okay, we got this feedback and I found, okay, this was too much, or this was really what paid off, so let's do that. Sometimes it was a technology issue. I mean, I found too that sometimes the technology would just fail and you would end up not pursuing or keeping a tool or an approach just because it was unwieldy or it crashed half the time, and then you really are dead in the water if you're doing like a hybrid class where most of the students are out there in space. You can't manage that. So I think that was an issue. I also noticed that growth and change tended to really concentrate in some of these flashpoints or hot button issues. And I think we probably could all recognize what those are. Assessment and testing was a big one. So what am I going to do about the big exam that's worth X amount of the grade? And a lot of good debate going on about that. So I think that was one where people maybe backed up and thought through because they realized, wow, this is a huge issue. And another, similarly, the issue of cameras. People initially coming in saying, well, all the cameras will be on and I'm going to make sure everybody's looking straight at me at all times. And then realizing the downsides to that. So I think in these select areas, we saw people really grappling, and but in others, yeah, we picked something and more or less went with it.
This episode is sponsored by Blackboard. Underpinning Blackboard's technology is the market's only true EdTech platform, offering more impactful and easy-to-use solutions, including accessibility tools, a virtual classroom, communication tools, and the LMS. The Blackboard EdTech platform powers personalized experiences fueled by data so that every individual is supported by the technology, services, and care they need to thrive and succeed. Learn more at blackboard.com.
A reminder that today's guests are Michelle Miller of Northern Arizona University, Justin Lauder of Texas Tech University, and Alexandra Salas of Delaware County Community College. What is your sense of where most of the students your institution serve landed in terms of what they want going forward? Everybody has talked about flexibility, and I think that's going to be one key area. But do you think students are, in general, and again, recognizing that there are limits on how much we want to generalize, but do you think students are going to be more comfortable with digital elements of their educations going forward? Michelle?
Well, this is a tough one as well. And I do think, students, if we say, well, you have to be here in person, and no, there's no way to come in remotely if you need to a meeting or a class. I mean, students will quite reasonably say, well, why not? That is one prediction. But I think that this is something else that's really been on my mind as I've watched this unfold. Is it is not going to be parallel to some of the other things we've seen going on with other kinds of remote options. I mean, I almost think about how I now love to get my groceries ordered online and drive. I love this. This is wonderful. I'll never go back to the old way. But this is not what we're talking about in higher education. Higher learning is not like this. It is not like ordering a box of Cheerios from the grocery store, and it never was, and it's not going to be. So I think that we're probably going to see different subgroups of students asking for different things. We may see more of a backlash than anything else, or people being more interested in face-to-face, or a perception that face-to-face is higher quality. So I think those are some of the complexities that as leaders in particular need to be thinking about right now.
Justin, do you think we are likely to see more demand for virtual possibilities, at least, or options? Or do you expect we're obviously seeing, I think, a lot of rhetoric around people wanting to be back, but do you think the interest in virtual options is likely to be undone or reversed?
Yeah, I think as Michelle was saying, I think we're going to see a lot of subgroups of students. We all pre-pandemic, we had the students that only wanted to go to school online, and the students that only wanted to go to school face to face. But we also saw the students that didn't care. They were just, they do whatever they need to get their degree. And you had the students that really wanted all of those co-curricular activities on campus, participate in Greek life or participate in intramural and things like that. So I think we will see kind of those groups flesh out even more. I agree with Michelle that that we were going to have some students that come back to face because they think it's better, and 15 years of our work to prove that online is as good as face to face, might have not been completely undone through the pandemic, but it was impacted. And so we kind of have to make those strides again. But what I'm seeing from our students is the ones that really want that college experience, being on campus, being involved in things. They are the ones that are really pushing to come back to face. Those students that are looking at education as a path to a job or career or this, they are still wanting the fully online, or at least that's what I'm getting from students. I get calls from students all the time that said, well, I moved because of a job, because of COVID, and I can't come back to Lubbock. What do you mean I can't take these classes online? I have for the last year. So that's starting a whole new conversation on, those student expectations that they change their lives and now, but they still want their education. So I think we're going to have to look through that kind of stuff and how we're going to give students that college experience that want it, and also provide students the education when they just want, to participate in classes and go about their lives.
My suspicion, and Alex, I'm interested in your perspective on this, is that you've both talked about how we may see more people falling into those all or none camp. My biggest, I don't know if it's a concern, but is about the group in the middle that's going to expect, they may even be living on campus and trying to participate in the elements that you talked about, Justin, but still wanting that flexibility. And I have this sense that institutions may struggle most with serving the students who want it blended. Alex, I don't know how that strikes you, but
I think it's a difficult question to answer because there's no right answer or wrong answer. It depends on the institution, and the students, and what the students may want at a particular time. But I do believe that regardless of the flexibility that students might want, they also want structure. They want consistency. So they want to know going in, what is my class going to look like? What's the delivery going to be like? Will I have contact with my instructor? Will the textbooks be digital, or will they be, will I need physical copies? There's certain things that students want, but they also want the flexibility. So they want a little bit of everything, but we also have to be practical and realistic in terms of being able to engage with students. So I think that there's a couple of things that may need to happen. Institutions, partnering, faculty, staff, instructional designers need to kind of rethink how instruction can be delivered. I think we did a wonderful job during COVID because we had a platform through which we could deliver instruction, but we also learned that you can't just cut and paste what you did face-to-face into a learning management system and say, all right, here's a link, let's go do it. It takes much more than that. Even designing a hybrid course, there's this finesse, this nuancing that happens when you're designing the course that's super important. And it's about knowing how to present it so that students have a true understanding of what the expectation is when they register for that class.
Michelle or Justin, do you have thoughts on the sort of challenge of hybrid and blended, and whether that's likely to be one of the hardest parts going forward? Justin?
I think so, because one thing we saw, one of the more difficult ways to do a class was when you had some students in person and some students online. And so that we got more complaints or concerns from students because they either felt like they were out on their own virtually, or the in-class students felt that the virtual kids had it easier or something like that. So I think that was probably one of the more difficult ones. And if we think about hybrid moving forward, what I've tried to tell faculty is, okay, let's look more at a flipped model where you don't have students in the classroom and online at the same time. maybe you have them all online and that's where they're watching lectures. But when we come into the classroom, that's where we're going to do some active engagement with each other. And so having that dual modality of classes, I think, was problematic. And so the hybrid approach, I think, in my opinion, that will work better would be closer to a flipped model or a high flex model where, they're all in one and then the other, so that you're getting some access to both modalities to help students. Now that's going to be difficult for universities to think about how do we do that and making sure we don't overlap classes and things like that. But I think we can figure that out and allow for those multimodal classes to be successful.
So that would suggest that if you're an institution that serves students who are both in person and remote and possibly fully remote, that maybe you have different sections of a course that are done in different ways rather than trying. I think my sense just from listening to the atmosphere was that what you said is right, that was the hardest part, and that was where the most complaints were from students, and where I think a lot of faculty members felt most challenged in trying to serve both audiences. So Michelle, how about you?
Well, I love some of the upsides and downsides and the real considerations that have been brought forward so far. I mean, I think it will really be important going forward for especially leaders who are not physically carrying these things that Justin and Alex have described. They're not physically doing these things, to really get concrete and remember what that is going to be like. I mean, I know with a high flex model with where students did have the option to be there remote or in person, I didn't know walking into a classroom if I was going to have 10 students and I'm going to be worrying about distance. Sometimes I had one student, and that was pretty interesting to have. Okay, here's 40 people on remote online who are going to work in this Google Doc, and you and I are going to have this small group discussion, or you might have two, and which two people is it going to be? I've been doing this a long time, and I think, and I've gotten some pretty good skills, and so for me, I felt like I could roll with that, but that is incredibly demanding. So I think kind of what's coming through here in imposing or coaxing along some predictability for the instructors and for the students is the way to go forward, especially if we are going to continue incorporating some of these options. And we also don't know, I mean, let's also get really concrete and practical. And part of the reason why I didn't know what to expect with every single class meeting was because students were frequently on 2-week quarantines. I was on multiple 2-week quarantines. And so sometimes I had to tell students, we're going to do this from my house. And I think we can all be hopeful that will be, the type of thing will be less of a consideration going forward. But of course, none of us know that either.
So there was a lot of praise and I think support for the sort of increased flexibility that institutions showed instructionally, particularly since that's where we're focused today. It sounds like all of you were saying to some extent that full flexibility is not necessarily going to be very viable, that there's going to probably have to be an increased balancing of flexibility with predictability. And so I'm curious, and I guess a justification for that would be that to some extent, people will be less in crisis and maybe a little bit closer to normal, but I continuing to feel like we're going to be a long way away from like truly normal. So how are you thinking about the balancing between flexibility and sort of empathy for students on the one hand, rigor and predictability on the other, recognizing that it's a balancing act? Alex, maybe start with you.
I was just going to say that I think the flexibility has to be manageable. Otherwise, you're going to have chaos. And a lot of the burden is going to fall on the faculty member and they might feel like they're teaching three different courses in one because, there's students online, there's students that come into class, there's students that, are strictly asynchronous or synchronous. And so I think it's going to also take the support of administration to do some creative cross-listing of courses, perhaps, and looking at staffing models whereby faculty can support one another when teaching these courses, because you also have to look at enrollment. What if you have one class that's totally synchronous and only has 10 students, but you have a course that's under-enrolled and has like 2 students, and you probably wouldn't run that section, right? But then you have to think about enrollment. And you have another course that's high flex that has a little bit of everything and has more students. If the numbers add up, perhaps you could combine it and have one faculty member cover it. But if it's too many different modalities, how is that going to make sense, right? So I think we need to have a structure in place whereby the students' needs are met, but the platform will also support the delivery and the faculty are supported so that they do not feel like they're being stretched in, opposite directions for it to work.
I completely agree. One thing that we had to do, and that we've actually continued, is many of our classes we are listing more than one faculty member, so that if a faculty member is out for 2 weeks or sick or whatever through the pandemic, we had that. But we've also got a number of classes that faculty realized, they could team teach certain things and really focus in on their strengths. So if one faculty really excels in the online portion, they're taking some of that, and that's causing some headache with administration and faculty workloads. And okay, if I'm teaching 4 classes at only half time, or what does that look like? So we're having to rethink of that. But I think those are some options that we're looking at to give that flexibility, and then also kind of think about the faculty who are still very apprehensive about coming back to teach full-time face-to-face, because we in my state we can't require vaccines, we can't require masks. So faculty are, having to think about things like that in their classes and classroom management. So I think that changes whatever the new normal is going to be, because I think it's going to be years before we get back to pre-pandemic normal. So I agree with you on that, Doug.
Given where we are, what is your biggest question about what the fall is likely to look like educationally? What's most keeping you up at night about what's ahead? Alex, do you have thoughts on that?
I know we're going to be offering more courses back on campus, more face-to-face, but we will still have a very significant component of online and, and other instructional modalities. But I think a big focus is going to be on connecting students to support services and providing supplemental instructional services, and just raising the awareness of the service component, the support services, because that rounds everything out. We have an early alert system that has been embraced, and it's really about expanding our communication, our wraparound services. So it's not that a student there's outreach and they're targeted to go to a particular service, but it's about, the student knows, the instructor knows, and then there's some follow-up. So what happened? How did it go? I think that is very, very important, because our student demographic is diverse. They all have different needs and different struggles, and by scaling that up and raising awareness about where they can go and who they can contact, and making it really easy, simplifying the process for them to access information. The college has to become a concierge of sorts.
The wraparound services is something that we're going to really need to think about, because as you mentioned with Michelle, there are some students coming out of high school now that are probably a little bit academically delayed because they've had 2 years of this now, that we've got to work through that. we have worked with groups on campus to create new roles within our LMS to allow student tutors to have access into classes and content. So when a student enrolled in the class needs that extra help, they've got these learning assistants or LAs to go to more than just the teacher. So increasing that support. Like Alex, we have an early alert system, and our students have actually pushed for more use of that. They have advocated that faculty utilize that system more, that they make sure that all classes have midterm grades and make sure this happens so that students are seeing, I think part of that is students are seeing the need for some additional support when we return to whatever campus is going to be like in the fall, so that they can, make progression through their academic career. We are looking at offering pretty much back to the same full or face-to-face load that we were offering pre-pandemic. Same number of online classes, same number of hybrid classes. But we also have, my campus has 9 regional teaching sites around the state. And we've seen increases in the number of students that are looking at classes there because they want face-to-face. They may want face-to-face. They can't come back to Lubbock, so they're going to do it at one of our teaching sites in the fall. And so I think the big area is how are we going to support students in what they need when they come back, where we're providing what they need, but it's not overwhelming, and it's just in time or real time support for what they need.
Michelle, maybe last word.
Right. Well, I have some pretty down to earth concerns and questions about this fall. You mentioned what keeps me up at night. And I think that's a little spot on as far as I'm concerned. I don't want to speak for my institution because there are a lot of leadership decisions and efforts going on right now that I'm not a part of. But right now, I would say that the working assumption that I'm picking up is that we will be a fully face-to-face, that is where the activity is going to be. And I kind of look at that and go, is that going to work? Again, with the progress, which is going to be very hard to predict as far as the pandemic, with students saying, well, why can't I? Why can't I go to my sister's wedding and Zoom into class? What is the atmosphere going to be like? None of us have been in these rooms and in this incredibly charged, for many reasons, atmosphere. For many reasons, the atmosphere that we're going to have. What will the mood of students be? Are we going to see that collaborative spirit, and that resilience that we've celebrated in this podcast? Is that going to hold, or are we going to really have a much more conflictual? Sort of a feeling in the classroom. I would also say that I'm also wondering, kind of in this bigger picture, among my faculty colleagues, are we going to also see them keeping up this emphasis on meeting student goals? And what I really do think is a very positive change in mindset, but from I'm here to enforce standards and make sure nobody gets away with anything, to what do you guys want to get out of this? What's working? What's not? Are there different things that are working for different students? I mean, many of my faculty colleagues are essentially exploring UDL, Universal Design for Learning. Are we going to see that continue? Like I got rid of all late work policies in my courses, something that I've wanted to do for years, and this was a great impetus to do it. I'm going to keep that up. Are other people going to do that? Or are we going to open up the syllabus from fall 2019 and run with it?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to those are great questions, because I think what they sum up is we saw a lot of not just flexibility, but also a lot of understanding and a lot of sense of common purpose. And I think the questions you just raised, and I think it's a lot of what's underpinned this whole discussion, is how much of the good things that we saw come out of the last year plus are we going to hold on to, versus how much are we going to try to go back to the old ways. And to the extent there's a mismatch there between what students want and what institutions and instructors are inclined to do, there is the potential that the sort of kumbaya moment that we had a lot of this past year, we may have a little bit less of. But we could go on for a lot longer, but we're going to have to wrap it up here. Really appreciate all three of you, Justin Lauder, Michelle Miller, and Alexander Salas, for taking time to join us. Thanks to Alex Salas of Delaware County Community College, Justin Lauder of Texas Tech University, and Michelle Miller of Northern Arizona University for their insights and assessments of what's ahead for the fall. I think you could hear in their answers a healthy dose of uncertainty and even doubt, which is appropriate for a moment that continues to find us in uncharted territory. A lot of college leaders are liberally sprinkling the word normal into their comments about the coming semester. And while the term is likely to look a lot more like fall 2019 than last fall did, there's a lot we still don't know, and even more that we can't control. So as today's panelists suggested, institutions and instructors would be wise to build as much flexibility and agility into their planning as possible, so that they can continue, as they largely did last year, to keep students on their educational paths no matter what surprises might be ahead. That's all for this episode of The Key. Thanks to Blackboard for its support, and to all of you for giving us a little of your time. And a reminder that if you're enjoying these discussions, please subscribe to The Key on Apple or Google Podcast, Stitcher, or your preferred podcast platform. Until next week, I'm Doug Letterman of Inside Higher Ed. Stay well and stay safe.